Hey, what's up, nerds? Paul here from Radio Free Hammer Hall, doing a requested video, and this is actually like a third-party request. This was actually Vince from Warhammer Weekly sent me over a request that he had gotten from someone about how he thinks about math in Age of Sigmar, and those that know Vince. Um, know that he doesn't really think about math in Age of Sigmar much at all. So he referred that over to me and said, "This is more in your wheelhouse than mine." So I wanted to do a video on it. I've addressed this in prior videos, but a lot has happened since then. This was like pre AOS 2. This was, before Honest Wargamer statistics. Um, so it really, I think, is a good time to do a refresh on how I think about math in Age of Sigmar. So there's two main rules that I have just kind of right off the top for dealing with math in Age of Sigmar. Number one is Mathhammer is a preparation tool. It's not a tool to use on the tabletop. It's really for the list building phase, making decisions about which units you're using. It's if you're trying to like break out a calculator and figure out like fiddly bits of how much goes here and how much goes there, like that's stuff that you really should have internalized ahead of time so that you understand what's happening. So you can say, yes, this number of attacks go that way, that number of attacks go that way, done. Or if you make a charge, what are your odds of getting the charge? If you cast a spell, what are your odds of casting the spell? These are all things that you shouldn't be trying to figure out on the fly. You should kind of have this banked in your brain ahead of time. My second rule really is to not compare war scrolls across armies, particularly across Grand Alliances. It's the big problem there is that armies are balanced internally, and on a broader scale they're balanced against each other. So individual war scrolls may have a big differential between armies because the internal balance is different. So that really means, don't look at two things from different armies and wonder why they have similar abilities but their points are way different. That is that's a fool's errand to really go down. I don't want to spend too much time kind of going on about examples about that. I could, but needless to say, it's a thing that you really shouldn't do. Next up is, generally how I rank and prioritize the different values on an attack profile. So my number one characteristic that I care about is the number of attacks, because that's really like that's a multiplier, right? Damage I would put as the second most important because that is also a multiplier, but it is a less consistent multiplier than attacks. If you look at an attack that has 5 attacks and 1 damage versus an attack with 1 attack and 5 damage, you can very quickly see where the difference is and why it's a problem, why having more attacks is generally going to be better than a higher damage characteristic. Because having higher attacks, you're going to get something through fairly regularly, whereas with having a high damage characteristic, you're going to get something through much less frequently, but when you do, it's going to be a big sledgehammer. And that's Spike likes consistency, so Spike likes high attack characteristic. Next on my hierarchy is actually Rend. Rend is a very, very powerful ability. I don't want to get too in the weeds on the math on it, but a very easy way to look at what the power of rend is to look at what rend does to an opponent's save of a 5+. 5+ goes to 6+. That cuts their number of saves in half. Versus like getting +1 to hit or +1 to wound, that's fractionally increasing the amount of damage that you get through. Whereas rend versus a 5-up save, that's gonna cut the number of saves in half. Like, that's massive. So yeah, rend is really important. Next on that, I would really put the hit and wound roll, and neither of those I really weight more than the other. Basic, high school algebra will tell you that the commutative property of multiplication makes the order of those relatively irrelevant. So I rate those pretty much the same. Getting rerolls to hit or wound is a very powerful ability. And I would probably put that ahead of rend. If it's, reroll all failed hits or reroll all failed wounds, I think that would probably be ahead of rend in the level of importance. The thing to always remember is rerolling ones is the worst possible buff that you can give anything. It is the buff of last resort. It's why I'm really not happy with the new Mystic Shield in 2nd edition, because it basically does nothing. It's I don't know. It's just very, very disappointing. Old Mystic Shield was powerful. I don't know. They could do something else that would have some kind of other effect that was better than just re-rolling ones without being overly broken. So that's sort of the basics there. There's a whole lot of other like fiddly little math things, but those are really the basics. Like, your attacks are the most important thing. Number of damage per attack is the second most important. Personally, then I would put rend next, based on some theory and some math that I'm not going to lay out entirely here. And then your hit and wound roll and modifiers to your hit and wound roll there's kind of like a hierarchy within those, but re-rolling all hits or re-rolling all wounds is a very powerful ability, and I would probably put that on top of rend in the hierarchy of powerful things. So, what do you do with all this? As I said off the top, what I really like to try and do is use it for army planning. Do a lot of like A/B comparisons between similar units. And figure out what the optimal unit choices are, and then to get an expectation of how a unit's going to perform on the battlefield. That's really what you want to use your Mathhammer for. There's certainly a deep level of analysis that you can do, and at some point GW made like their formula for coming up with points public, and I think that's probably going to really inform what points changes in the next General's Handbook look like. Hopefully it balances out points a little bit better. In figuring these things out, like comparing units of disparate point values, I try and break it down to what something's damage output is. So attacks times odds to hit times odds to wound times damage, and then dividing that by points. to figure out what your damage per point is, and that kind of like normalizes it so that you can compare two different units, a unit that's 120 points versus a unit that's 200 points, and figure out which one is really more punchy per point, which one's going to be a better investment. Something else that I didn't really talk about is weapon reach on melee. That is something else to consider, but I think that's something I don't prioritize it very high at all. It's kind of an afterthought. I usually would not pick something with a higher reach unless everything else was the same, or very close to the same. I think my only deviation from that really is how I've armed my clan rats. Personally, I prefer the spears over their hand weapons. Basically, under the theory that you're going to be using hordes of clan rats more, so having a 2-inch reach versus a 1-inch reach is going to get you a lot more attacks in, which is going to make them a lot more punchy overall. So you're improving your attacks characteristic in sacrificing -1 to hit, which is, I think, a trade-off that I'd be very willing to make. Like that, the math on that, I think, works out correctly. What else do I think about in Mathhammer? Other things to think about in regard to base sizes and reach is to think about how many units you're actually going to be able to get into combat. A unit with 1-inch reach on a 25 millimeter base, that's going to be able to, 25 millimeters is just under an inch. So that means you're going to be able to get 2 ranks into combat. But a 32 millimeter base is greater than an inch, so you're only going to be able to get 1 rank into combat. So those sort of things, that's where reach can come into play. Your range on your melee weapons, it comes into play in relation to how large bases are. So that's very important. Be aware of what your base size is and how that affects how many attacks you're going to get into combat. And that's fairly simple math. Unfortunately, it requires a metric imperial conversion, but I think most people can handle that. That's just a Google search away. I think I might have done a video on that at some point. But the important thing to know is that a 25 millimeter base is slightly less than 1 inch, so that means you're usually going to be able to get in 2 ranks pretty universally on a 25 millimeter base unit. So that's, I think, a lot of, the really important stuff that I think about. I wanted to take a moment to address the global stats that you have from the Honest Wargamer. And I think a very important thing that Rob hits on very frequently, and I'm really glad that he does it, is that the stats require interpretation. They're not just look at the numbers and the numbers jump out at you and mean things. An army's win rate, match win rate percentage, that's more meaningful the more number of the greater the number of results that you have for an army. You can have, I think currently the highest win rate percentage army only has 3 people that ever took it to a tournament or something like that. So like that doesn't even really count. That's probably like one person with one list, and they're really good with it and they're really familiar with it. And that's not really representative of what um what that army's going to actually do for the average player. Um on the flip side, you also need to take into account where you have very large numbers of results for an army and what that can do to statistics. Thinking of Stormcast Eternals in particular, they're one of the most popular armies, if not the most popular army. Um, but if you look at their match win rate and their podium results, they seem really lackluster. And you have to really ask the question of like why that is. And the gut response might be, well, they're just not that good of an army, but they're very popular. And I think the problem really lies more in their popularity and them being a very common starter army for people. And an army that people like the aesthetic of. They're like the poster boy army of Age of Sigmar. So you've got a lot of people playing that army that are not necessarily very good. So your low end of the results, I think, are less important than the top end. Like, I think you can throw out a lot of the 0, 1, 2 win results, because those are not necessarily people that are really even vying for the top. That's not a reflection of people that have like a good chance of actually winning a tournament anyway. Which I know sounds like a really, really douchey thing to say, but I too believe in honesty in wargaming, and sometimes you just gotta tell the truth. Like, yeah, there's a lot of new players that play Stormcast. There's a lot of bad players that play Stormcast. Like, you just have to accept that. I think the same is probably also true of Legions of Nagash. It's a very easy army to get painted up, so I think that makes it very alluring to a lot of newer players. And it performs very well for a lot of people. I don't want to say it's exactly an army that's on easy mode, but there are definitely some things that allow players of lower skill to do better with that army than they would do if they were handed another army of equal quality that was just harder to play. So those are just sort of my thoughts there. I'm sure I'm going to get flamed for making those sorts of comments about certain armies, but I think that's the truth. You can look at Daughters of Cain and see their outrageously high win percentages. And the thing to bear in mind, like with Daughters of Cain, is it's basically one list. Or not really one list, but it's one list concept that's really continuously winning tournaments or doing really well in tournaments. And if you're not running that, you're not doing well. Like, that's what all of like the 0, 1, 2 win results are all like not Hagnar armies. Or if there are any Hagnar in there, it's like people that really don't know what they're doing. Or they had a really bad day, or they were like totally drunk when they did it. There's just a lot of issues with that. Some armies that are newer, there is definitely a recency bias in the overall quality of armies, so you want to be careful about jumping on the new hot thing, because the new hot thing can very quickly fizzle out once people figure out how to play against it. I honestly think that's what's going to happen with Flesheater Courts. I don't think it is as good of an army as it is an army that people don't really know how to play against very well yet. Um, and I think your top dog army is going to end up being Skaven until a new book comes out. Because in like the great rock paper scissors game of competitive Warhammer, um, Skaven is definitely the rock, and Flesh Eater Courts is definitely scissors, and they're going to get smashed by the rock very frequently. Um, Also, with those stats, it's important to take into account that they are competitive stats for major tournaments. But mixed into that are a lot of people that go for reasons other than trying to win. Uh, Tournaments are social events. They're a lot of fun. You go, you make new friends, you meet people, you meet internet celebrities. Shout out to Martin Orlando for introducing me to everyone as an internet celebrity every time, like literally every time he introduces me to people, um, which is really funny. And I have to say, like, and I in no mean to discourage anyone from coming up and talking to me by saying this. It is super weird to me still to have people know who I am at an event and I don't know them. Like I could not know them from a hole in the wall, but they've like watched all my videos and like come and strike up a conversation. Like I'm naturally an introvert, so that's like culture shock to me as soon as that happens. And I don't mean to discourage anyone from actually doing that. Like I'm the kind of introvert that is like all about like having extroverts come up and like adopt me and be my friend and stroke my hair and tell me everything's going to be okay and we're going to be friends now. Um, it's just a weird culture shock that I'm still kind of getting used to. Um, and my channel's not even that big, but it's not a big community. Um, Other things to keep in mind with the stats. Stats aren't everything. Um, I think Age of Sigmar is in a place where there are a very large number of armies in the hands of the right pilot on the right day. They're going to do well. And a good army in the hands of a bad player is usually going to go sideways. So, you know, I have played top tier armies and stopped the bejesus out of them with armies that are not top tier. I have definitely beaten New Skaven with Nergal. Um, Part of that just comes down to I'm really experienced with Nergal, and I know the tricks in that book to make weird stuff happen and uh, do things tactically to grab stuff at the last minute. And a little bit of luck always helps. So, um, those are really important factors. Um, I would say also don't pick your armies based on the Mathhammer. Um, a video that I really wanted to do is, and I haven't really figured out how to address it properly yet, is how playing an army that plays to your personal strengths and your personal play style, I think is generally far superior than to just playing a good army that puts up good results. Um, I can tell you, Flesh Eater Courts and Slanesh both put up great stats. They would be terrible in my hands. That is not my play style. I don't do well with that. That's not my thing. Skaven, I picked up before I knew they were good because I really liked the play style. And I had previously kind of sworn off horde armies, and then I saw what the book did, and I'm just like, ah, I guess I'll paint a bunch of clan rats. And I've really enjoyed playing Skaven. It's nice to have an army that's good, that is also in your play style. But for the past year and a half, I've been playing Nergal, and that's a very middle of the road army. I've been having a great time with it. I think I've been putting up better than average results with it. It's, I think it's probably, according to the stats, like around like a 45% win rate. I think my win rate is probably closer to like 60. So I feel pretty good about it. Um, Won a local tournament with it. Went 3-2 at a couple of GTs with it. So I feel pretty good about it. I like Nergal. Picking up Skaven in no way means I'm going to be putting down my Nergal. Um, but the flip side of this is my third army, which is actually my first army, is my free people, which are pretty terrible. And I think they need a lot of work to really be any good. Does that mean that I'm going to throw them in the trash or sell off the army? No, because they're my playstyle and I like them and I have, emotional attachment to them. So I'm not really about to, get rid of them. So that's definitely a case where I think playing an army that you like is more important than playing an army that the stats say is good. Because if your army is in your wheelhouse, you like it, you're really devoted to it from a player perspective, then you're going to put up above average stats with it. So, if you're going to go take an army with like a 50% win rate, and it's like totally in your wheelhouse. You love the army, you study the army, um, and you get a lot of experience with it. You could have a good day and go 4-1 at a GT with it, even though it has an average win rate. Um, that's not really an unusual thing to be able to do. Um, a friend of mine literally just did that with Nergal. He went 4-1 at a GT and and it was a fairly competitive GT. And got fourth place with Nergal, and it's a fairly unusual Nergal army. He's been playing it since the book came out. He's been basically running iterations of the same core list ever since the book came out, and it's just really powerful. It's really good, and it's awesome when you're comfortable with an army. It's your thing. Um, in a lot of ways, that helps you defy the math. And in that, another note that I really want to press on for people in relation to math, but it's really just a general sort of thing that I advise all players to do to get better, is to study your army. Study the crap out of it. Know your war scrolls inside and out. Know the interactions inside and out. Sit down, read your book over and over again. Just read the match play stuff over and over again. Internalize all of those different things. See an ability that affects keyword X and then go look for all of keyword X throughout the book and see what combinations you can possibly create with that. This is not stuff that you want to try and figure out on the fly. You want to know what all of your stuff does ahead of time. And that part of that really is Mathhammer, to know what to expect out of your units. But before you know what to expect out of your units, you also have to know what they do. What their basic rules are. And that's going to help you tremendously toward getting what you want out of your army. So I think I've prattled on about this for like a half hour now. So this is my general overview of how I think about math and Mathhammer, how you use math in Age of Sigmar. It is a tool, not a be-all, end-all. I think it's something that everyone should be doing to a certain extent. You don't necessarily need to do the level of Mathhammer that I do, because I do math for fun because I'm weird. But I certainly encourage people to, you know, just kind of do some math out on a calculator, learn what different dice results statistics are. You're rolling d6s, so you don't have a lot to remember. Um, Spreadsheets are your friend. I think that's about all I really got for you for right now. So I think I'm going to end it here. I hope that was informative, answered people's questions. If you have any more questions, I really highly encourage people to drop them down in the comments, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. So again, shout out to Vince at Warhammer Weekly for the video suggestion, and whoever that anonymous person was that had asked him the question. So, um, yeah, that's about it for now. And also, since I brought it up, thanks to Rob at Giannis Wargamer and his whole team over there, LLV, for doing the stats and helping us all have a better, clearer picture of what armies are good and what stats armies are actually putting up, so that we're not playing a guessing game and not working with conjecture. We can actually have some really good broad data to work with. So that's it for now. I will talk to you all later.